Hey everyone, today we're taking a look at the Singularity Stream S for small, I guess. For those of you that follow my social media, you probably noticed I've been posting about this build for a little bit of time. This is the small form factor version. If you follow Singularity Computers, you'll notice they recently put out a M, which I guess is for medium, and maybe one day there might be a large. So this case is completely dismantleable. You can flat pack the entire case essentially, but it doesn't come flat packed. I'm just going to quickly go over the features of the case, and then I'm going to go over some of the stuff you get with the case, and then I'm going to go over some of the issues I had and some of the things that in the manual that probably need some clarification. So right off the bat, let's start with the case itself. This case is comprised mainly of acrylic. You have an acrylic top, acrylic bottom, and you have two panels, this one and this one on the rear, which are aluminum. Now, they come in pretty much, I believe it is powder coated. It's not powder coated. It might be anodized aluminum. I don't remember off the top of my head. I believe now it is anodized aluminum. These are black when you buy the case. And he offers multiple colors. When I say he, I mean Daniel Canyon from Singularity Computers. You can get the plastic top and the rear, which I'll show you in a second. The plastic tops, mine came in a chrome mirror. It's a dark, and then he has a chrome, not chrome, but then he has like a silver mirror that is lighter, and then he has a gold, and he has a white. Obviously, these are acrylic mirror panels on the top and rear, so they will, kind of scratch fairly easily, like most acrylic. So be very careful when you're handling it. You're gonna get a bunch of micro scratches elsewise. But yeah, the case is completely assembled with M4 bolts. There might be, from what I understand, there might be some M3 screws used somewhere, but mostly it's all M4. And you do get an accessory bag that comes with the case. The case by default supports a 240 on top and a 240 on the side. So you cannot use any radiator thicker than 40 millimeters. So I have a Heatkiller 240 on the top and a Heatkiller 240 on the rear. These radiators are 30 millimeters thick, I believe. And I am also, speaking of Heatkiller, using the Heatkiller 4080 STRIX Tough and this Heatkiller 4 Pro in the back on AM5. Now, the reason why I chose an AMD platform is because with this kind of air volume and the two 240 radiators in a tight space, using an Intel CPU, if you're not just gaming, it's a little bit of power draw, quite a good amount of power draw to then dump, which is also a reason why it's a 4080 and not a 4090. Because while I do feel this case can handle that configuration of, like, say, a 14900K and a 4090, you're going to get better temperatures, lower noise, using less power-hungry components. I mean, it's just kind of common sense, yeah? So in the bag, you do get these ribbon cables. You'll notice I'm using one for the 24-pin, simply because you cannot, no traditional 24-pin wire is going to fit. It's going to make this kind of arch that arches like this, right? That's kind of what I got going on there. So you'll get an 8-pin one. It's longer than this. This is the original, I guess, prototype version. And you'll get a longer version like this for the 8-pin, which will go into the CPU EPS and go into your power supply. Speaking of power supply, this case is only compatible with the Asus Loki PSU. 750, 850, 1000, white or black. Reason being is the power board that he offers, which is this really thin thing that's probably hard to see. It's kind of buried in there, so it's really kind of hard to tell. But this power board plugs directly into the PSU, and then you don't have that issue anymore where you got to connect everything and so forth. And that power board requires the use of an Asus Loki. Now, speaking of power board, you might be wondering, if everything's plugged in, how do I connect my accessories? Well, on the very bottom behind this GPU, on that power board, there are two connectors that allow peripherals, SATA, Molex, etc. Now, these use the same pinout as the factory cables from your Loki PSU. So what you'll do is you'll connect your Loki PSU cables to that part of the power board for your SATA, so your hard drives, your pumps, your etc. Obviously, you're buying this case to water cool. You're not buying this case to air cool. Wouldn't make any sense. Speaking of which, if we rotate to the front of the case here, you'll notice that there is a distro plate on the front of this case. Sorry guys, one-man camera here. Let me come back here a little bit. Okay. So, you can feel here. You'll see that this is a return. This is going into the pump in and then the pump out. And this is used to be a drain. You don't actually have to install a drain fitting. You can just turn it and just let it pull out. That's kind of what I've done here. And this part is the, whatchamacallit, this is the pump out section here, right? Which is connected to this. This is all one piece. This is inlaid over, so it looks separated, but it actually is one piece. And this is the power button. This is a captive touch power button. A word about this power button that the manual does not state clearly is that this power button is hooked up to the power board by a cable that then is on the power board. There is a 2-pin power connector. I'll show you guys the cable. So on the power board, you'll see something that says power switch, and it will use this 2-pin header cable, right? So you'll plug this into the power board where it says power switch, and you'll plug the other end into your motherboard where you would plug in the power switch. Okay, and that's what makes this button works. Hooking up the power board alone to the power supply, this button does nothing. Okay, it also works like a regular computer button. If you hold it down, you know, it turns it off. Case around, it's reflecting off my light here, which is why it looks white. Otherwise, it is just mirror acrylic essentially, but on a darker shade. I think this is a smoke mirror acrylic. But yeah, so obviously this is where your drives are supposed to go. I think you can put 2 SSDs here. Obviously, it's such a cramped space to be running wires here because the power board is actually literally right here. And you only really have this amount of space on top and this space in the bottom. Now, if you don't have a distro in the front like I do and for the bottom, you're going to see all these wires. So you either have to 3D print something to clean it up, or just don't use SATA drives. It's just going to look messy. That's all I'm going to really say. Don't use SATA drives. It's going to look messy. This is where the PSU actually is. So this is an inlet for the PSU to breathe. Speaking of which, I don't know if it's related to this Loki, this particular Loki, or something else going on. But my power supply fan, once it spins up, doesn't actually stop. Obviously, the Lokis, you know, the power supplies are designed to not have the fan on all the time, but I noticed that once mine kind of turn on, it doesn't really stop. It might just be I have a defective Loki, or I have an issue connected with the power board. I'm not saying it's an issue with the power board. I'm just letting you guys know if it happens to you, then it's not just me. Okay, so additionally, you have this piece that goes on the rear here. You can see that mine is off, and the reason it's off is because you'll notice that it doesn't really fit with the power cord there. You will need to use like a 90-degree power cord that's rather thin. Something like this, right, with a 90-degree on the end, would make it a lot easier for that cover to go on. That is something else I've noticed. All right, so some caveats about the case itself. There's a lot of RGB. You have a strip here. You have a couple strips. I think you have 3 strips built into the case alone. So if I turn the lights off, you'll see it in the B-roll. It's bright. It's a very bright machine at night. But you know, I've set it to solid. They are RGB, so you can kind of do whatever color scheme you want. But you know, I've set mine to solid, and that's the way I like my RGB. Now, what else you get in the bag of accessories is you do get a 16-pin. You guys notice I am using custom cables, so you don't have to do that, obviously. You can just use the cables he provides with the case. But that's pretty much the rundown of the case itself. Now let's just quickly go into what I've done inside this build. Initially, when I approached this build, I felt it was a bit challenging in lining things up the way it's supposed to be. Now, what I mean by that is if you were to approach this from a traditional, I don't know, my first loop, my second loop, not a case I'd really point towards beginners unless you plan to do soft tubing. If you want to do soft tubing in this build, it's extremely easy. If you want to do hard tubing, you're going to need a good amount of adapters and you're going to need some patience. Reason being is, one, it's small, so it's hard to get things where you need to go. But runs like behind the rear run on this, on this radiator here, can really only go to the CPU. Now, if you're not using a lot of adapters, that's a double 90 that's very short and a very small, tight space to put it in, which makes it kind of difficult, right? And then you have this run that would normally come into the GPU on top here, and then this will come out here and come down here. And then somewhere along the way, you're going to have to fit that return from that rad port out. I mean, this is a very logical from the rad straight to the reservoir. That is the most logical run. I think everybody who's doing this build is going to do that run because nothing else really makes sense in terms of proximity and general planning. Okay, so I'm using a GPU where the ports are on the front and the rear. So you're actually not seeing my in and out because it's actually behind the GPU and going into this distro plate that kind of handles all that. If I did not have this distro plate, this would be a nightmare. This kind of GPU port layout where it's on the rear is going to be an utter nightmare in this case. Unless maybe if you have soft tubing and you're willing to run a tube all the way over there like that, it's going to look a little messy, a little spaghetti, but it's going to be a nightmare. So this is kind of designed to have a GPU block where the terminal's on top, very traditional, like a EK water blocks. And I kind of have this feeling that when Daniel designed this case, he kind of built it around a certain set of water cooling parts he had on hand. So an EK water block with the traditional terminal layout, an EK Evo, or I guess velocity at this point. Most people have velocities now where the ports are lined up this way, and EK radiators. And I think that in that kind of layout, if you bought all EK products here with traditional terminal positions, you would have a much easier time. And that is my recommendation. Now, obviously, I'm using Heatkiller here. And just a quick disclaimer, Heatkiller did send me the radiators and the blocks. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Heatkiller, if you guys don't know. So now you know. So what I've done is I have the pump coming out down to here, and this distro. And then from here, it is going to the rear inlet of the GPU, and then coming from the outlet here, which is also behind this. It's very tight. This was such a pain in the butt, and I had to take this thing apart so many times just to get this in. It's unreal. So and then this comes out, goes into this rear distro that I made, and then comes back into this. Where's that going? So somewhere. Oh, sorry. It goes into the CPU here, CPU in, comes the CPU out, goes into the rear radiator, comes out here from the front radiator, and then returns back to this radiator, which then returns to the reservoir. So there's a lot going on in a very small space. And some of you might be wondering, if you're long-term water coolers or been doing this for a while, how the hell did I even get the tubing in? Because you'll see that these are not like those kind of C-Pro fittings from Thermaltake where you can just attach the two ends, especially for the parts like this, this one right here. Amazingly, this top rad, this rear distro, this CPU block goes in as a one piece. As in terms of I drop this entire piece in and then I tighten the CPU block. That made measuring a total pain for the distro. Reason being is, for those of you that make your own distros, I totally forgot about this when I was measuring this rear one, so I'll let you guys know. Well, as a reminder, when you have the CPU block tightened, put into position versus fully tightened down, there's about a 2 to 3 millimeter drop. So keep that in mind. So when you put your CPU block in place and you want to measure like a pass-through portal or something like a pass-through panel or even a distro, tighten it all the way down, because that 3 millimeters is going to show up later and bite you in the ass when it doesn't look perfect. And so that's something that I luckily could address with a fitting, because I had a slightly different orientation originally to begin with. But in my situation, that's how the top goes in. Now, the bottom part, this GPU and this block, is actually one piece as well. I attach it outside, and then I move it in, I drop it in. So to put this loop together, first I drop in the bottom GPU, because once this top goes in, I can't move the GPU anymore. Then I drop this whole top piece into the case. So it's a two-step procedure. Having taken it apart 7 times or more, I can take the build apart within 15 minutes now. So it's good for me. Another thing about this build here is this pump block. This supports every DDC, but I would say here's one. I'll show you guys. This comes on the arterial water box as well, which I guess I could bring into the video just for a quick show. These pump blocks, these are the DDC pump blocks. That's what's here. Okay, these are supposed to be milled a little bit over 7 millimeters down. Okay, and they are. But I had received one that was not milled all the way down, and they were aware that there was an issue with one of them or 2 of them, and I got replacements. Now, I did measure my replacements, and they are milled to the specification that Daniel mentioned. Now, but what I have had issues with is my pump impeller rubbing against this part. Now, at first I thought it was maybe because I had some air bubbles in there, and you know, that kind of causing the impeller not to spin perfectly dead even, and therefore causing some rubbing. But then I noticed that that wasn't the case. So I used a thicker O-ring to kind of push it back a little bit more. But what I would suggest is, if you're going to use anything that uses this, either the water box in this case, or maybe even a larger version, use the 4.1 DDC from EK. I don't know what Lang version that is, but if you look at the impeller, it's kind of got these like waves on it rather than a solid impeller. I'll put some photos up so you guys have an idea what I'm talking about. And that would not give you this issue where you may rub. I mean, initially from the problematic one I had, I actually sanded it down a little bit so it wouldn't rub. But that's just kind of one of the other issues I had here. Other than that, I mean, the case also is powder coated illusion cherry, so this is you know, not going to be something he offers. You have to, if you want to get it powder coated. I also had the EK convection also powder coated to match. This color is actually really nice, but it's a shame that indoors it doesn't really pop like it would outside. But that's all powder coat, right? I mean, the stuff that pops outside looks amazing, but then, you know, it is what it is. All right, so let's talk about performance, okay? So obviously, this is going to be the interesting part for a lot of you guys considering this case. It comes with the solid front glass panel. I personally feel that, you know, once you put this panel on, it does have, obviously, there's a lot of gaps and stuff for the case to breathe. But I personally feel like I'm going to, if I was keeping this set up for long term, I would personally, you know, cut something out of acrylic with more vents and then put it on. Or just even run it off. It looks dope with it off, right? But it's up to you. So what I'll do is, to make it realistic, I'm going to put the glass on, and then I'll try it with the glass off to simulate, say, a very porous acrylic panel, to put it nicely. So as you can see right here, my GPU is sitting at 23.5. I'll do a screen recording so it won't be so hard to see. And my T sensor for the water temperature is 22. You'll see another GPU number 1 at 36.5. That is the internal GPU on the CPU itself. Okay. This is an AMD CPU, so obviously the moment I load it, it's going to go to 95 degrees or 90 degrees, whatever the BIOS is allowing it to go to. I believe Asus has dropped it to 90 rather than 95, maybe even 85, just so folks don't, you know, lose their pants. So you'll notice right now at idle, my GPU to water temp delta is 1.5 degrees. All right, and my VRAM is at a 1.5 degrees. Okay, and my CPU is sitting at 33. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up the GPU and the CPU at the same time, simulating like a heavy gaming load where my CPU is going at 100%. All right, so I'm gonna run that for 10 minutes. Where I'm gonna look at my delta difference, and then we are going to then put the door on and run it again for 10 minutes and look at my water temp delta. Remember, water cooling is about looking at the temperature delta of the water, not your components. If your components have horrible temperatures, but your water temp delta is very good, that means your blocks suck or your contact sucks. All right? So we're always paying attention to the temperature of the water, not the temperature of our components. How well your loop is performing is totally based off of your delta for your water temperature. There was one guy that had this whole thing with me on the forums about he doesn't believe this case can have a good delta because his gigantic alpha cool Mora equivalent was giving him like a 10 degrees delta. I don't think he was actually looking at delta of his water temp. I think he was more looking at delta of his components, right? When we say delta in water cooling, we are almost always referring to the water temperature, all right? If we're talking about the block, we'll say, what is the delta of that block, right? And that is obviously, again, compared to water temperature, okay? So let's get started. So you can see from the results there, for those of you that didn't watch the whole thing, I did fast forward. Pretty much with the glass on, as shown here, but with the plastic still on, the water temp delta goes up by 6 degrees. So with it off, it's actually not bad. It's about 8 or 9. With it on, it becomes significantly higher at the point of which is not that great. Now, you may make the argument that because I have this rear distro here, I am blocking some of the airflow from those few slits. That is true. So this distro is technically hindering some airflow that would be coming in elsewise. Now, I would give that, let's just say, a 2 degree deduction on your water temp. I still feel that if you had some type of ventilated acrylic panel, you do some design, you're still going to get better temperatures at the end of the day. I will make that suggestion over to Daniel. Maybe that they can, I mean, this is a very nice theme they have going on with the panels on top. I'm going to tilt it over a little bit. You guys can probably see that on camera. Right? That's a nice design. I feel that, they could do something similar with an acrylic panel in the front and still have that very cohesive look, but have more airflow. I mean, let's be honest, this gap is not exactly sufficient. I mean, there is probably a 1 millimeter gap between the glass. Well, let's be fair, probably 3 millimeter at best, because there's a rubber ring between the two screws. So there's probably a 3 millimeter gap by the glass, but that's not enough. So, but overall, it's a very nice looking case, in my opinion. It's not to everybody's taste. Given the amount of rad space of two 240s, it's not bad given the size. This is a very small case. You guys will see when I put up the water box, just for comparison. I did get the water box, but this is, an Asus Falachon, right? You can see that this is not exactly a gigantic case. So, as terms of price point, this case was sent to me by Singularity Computers, so I didn't pay for the case, but obviously all the powder coating and everything else is on me, right? So at the price point of $600, I think it's decent, but it definitely does have need some improvement on the manual, and I hope that my video clarifies some of those items for you. I did want to mention there is a jumper button on the power board that allows you to start the SATA and all the fans without powering on the motherboard. Kind of like the override you would do on a power supply when you're trying to fill your loop. That's really cool. So yeah, this is overall, I'm personally going to cut something. You can always measure the hole locations, and then cut it. You don't have to get fancy. Just take a drill, buy a piece of acrylic, get a scorching knife. You can make something pretty ventilated really easily. But I think that maybe, to be honest, I don't think it'd be hard for him to sell some acrylic panels. It wouldn't be more than this glass, I assume. Probably more just the time to get it cut. So before I close the video, I just wanted to show you guys this water box. This is also the Singularity arterial 2. This one is the 240 version, not the 560. So it's actually pretty small. I put it next to this build just to give you guys an idea of the sizing here. This is an external rad box. I know for some folks they would think, well, what's the point of a rad box that's only two 240s and 40mm thick? I kind of agree with that sentiment, but at the same time, I understand that not everybody wants a huge Mora laying around. So this case right here, not case, but water box, it uses a DDC pump, and it fuels two 40mm thick radiators. It's got essentially bolted on filters from all sides. Okay, this is aluminum, what looks to be, I think, anodized aluminum. Okay, and yeah, so I'm gonna be working on this eventually. I got some other stuff in the pipelines for many Asus related items and some Thermaltake stuff, so this might gonna have to take a back burner for a while. But I just wanted to show you guys a good pairing. So this is a Lian Li A4. You can see that they're of similar size, right? So technically, you could have, I don't know, I guess this and this together, right? Or, but then there's always the argument that if you're going to use a water box, use the largest one possible. But for folks that don't want a huge external radiator setup, this is definitely an option. Or maybe you just have a test bench, right? And you want to test water blocks. Some people do that. Two 240s is more than enough to test a water block. But yeah, so thanks for watching. Stay safe and take care.